So the shir is again sponsored by Rabbi Michael and Jerry Laxmeter for Yerushalayim, the granddaughter Avigail Batshena Aharona. And also this week, it's also for Rabbi Laxmeter, who's having some procedure today. So for Shlema to Moshe Chuna ben Miriam Chaya b'toch shar Choli Israel. I see some people need to make an entrance. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start from the beginning. V'daber Elokim el Moshe v'yomer elav ani Hashem. God, and obviously this verse is difficult, and I'm not going to fully engage all of the theology, which really is necessary based upon the various names being used as you move to the next pasuk. Vaera el Avram el Yitzchak el Yaakov v'kel Shakai u'shmi Hashem lo nadati lahem. So we have various names of God, and we have some kind of interesting introduction. But I'm going to skip to the more famous element, or elements, you can decide. V'gam hakimoti et briti itam. So going back, I appeared to there shouldn't be three dots there, I think. I appeared to the patriarchs as Kel Shakai, v'gam hakimoti et briti itam, latet lahem et eretz Canaan, et eretz Mogoreim asher garu ba. And I'm going to keep my covenant. So over here, when it focuses on the covenant, because there's various things that could have been said. So what's being articulated is that, the land of Israel, there's a larger picture here, which means right now we're stuck in the middle of Egypt. We know that we're getting towards the end, although this is the beginning of the end. If you want, this is the Atchalta de Geula, this is the beginning of the redemption, and sometimes redemption processes can take a while. I heard a very prominent rabbi say that Rav Kook made up the term Atchalta de Geula, which is completely not true, being that it's in the Gemara. So I was just kind of surprised that he could have said that, and other people have used it. I don't know. I don't. Maybe he misspoke. Maybe saying the current times. I don't know what to say. But I can find older, as far back as you want to go. You can find people saying, "Oh, now we're by the Itchalta de Geula." Anyway, depends how you start, how you count the beginning. Posuk Hey, V'gam ani shamati et na'akat b'nei Yisrael sher Mitzrayim ma'avidim otam is kored briti. So again, there's going to remember of the covenant, and here it's within the context of the Egyptian servitude, pain, slavery. So hakimot yet briti is kored briti. L'chein emor l'vnei Yisrael ani Hashem. So tell the people. God is saying, I am about to get involved in history. That's really what this issue is about. Bereshit, God creates nature and kind of lets nature go off on its own, every now and then making every so slight adjustments, shall we say. Okay, destroying stone, which is very bad to say in the context of hearing that there was an earthquake there this morning. But, every now and then making these slight adjustments, but essentially it is a God who pushes the start button in terms of history, in terms of nature, but is hovering in the background. If you just think about God's revelation to Moshe in terms of, here's a sign, here's a sign, here's a sign, and then moving on to all the plagues, do this, do this, do this, do this, you don't find Avram or Yitzchak or Yaakov with that kind of a conversation and that kind of an ability and that kind of a revelation taking place. So meaning it's not just the revelation at Sinai, it's everything leading up to this. But over here, God is telling Moshe that there is an open brit which needs to be fulfilled, which is also part of the names of God as well, of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei HaYehovah B'Yiyah, and that for them it was all future-oriented, but the future is going to be now, which means that there is also a present tense of God's word coming to fruition. I just now saved you looking at Rashi and looking at the Maharal Nagor Aryeh. Okay, so just know that that's in the background. L'chein, Posuk Vav, Emor Livnei Yisrael, Ani Hashem. So going back to Yud Kei Vav Kei, I am God. Just in case we're not following some of the theology. V'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlat Mitzrayim. So those of you may be familiar with the various quote-unquote lashonot of Geula. I'm going to hotzeti, extricate you from Sivlot Mitzrayim, from the pain, suffering of Egypt. V'yitzalti etchem, I'm going to save you. Me'avodotam, from the servitude. V'ga'alti etchem, and I am going to liberate you. V'zroa netuya, with a strong arm, uv'shvatim gdolim, and with a great amount of judgments. Pasuk Zayin. V'lakachti etchem li, la'am, and I will take you to me as a people. Vayiti lachem lelokim, and I will be for you a God. V'yadatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem, and you will know. How's that for a commandment, a prediction? You will know, ki ani Hashem Elokechem hamotzi etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, which means again God getting involved in history. The way that this is going to take place, the texture of this is going to be such that they will not have any kind of doubt about what just now happened. And maybe we should read the next pasuk because we are Zionists. And again, I just want to give a warning. I may trigger somebody today in terms of Zionism, so be prepared and be warned. Veheveti etchem el haaretz asher nasati et yadi latet ota la'avram litzuk liYaakov v'natati ota lachem morasha ani Hashem. And I'm going to bring you to the land, right? He's going to stretch out his hand, which I have given to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and you're going to receive this as an inheritance. I am God. Again, Ani Hashem. So again, lots of promises were made in Bereshit, and now a lot of fulfillment of those promises are taking place over here. So those of you who do know that the Gemara attaches or connects the 4 lashonot of Geula with the 4 cups of wine that we drink, and there are other opinions in the Yerushalmi, there are at least 2 others. One which goes back to Bereshit and Yosef and the wine steward, another which goes towards the future, but there are 3 different opinions listed over there. So some of you may know that there is some intrigue regarding a 5th cup. If you don't know this, then know that most likely the Kos Shel Eliyahu is a compromise, pour it but don't drink it, a compromise between 4 cups and 5 cups. So therefore we have the 5th cup, but we don't drink it because there is this difference of opinion. There are those who actually read in the text of the Gemara that there is a 5th cup, and then their text of the Gemara is that there are only 4 cups. So that's, again, part of the intrigue. There are those, again, we'll go back to our Zionist warning, there are those who have determined that, or claimed that during the time that we lived in Israel, the Veheveti had come true, so therefore they would drink 5 cups, and during the time that they were in exile, there were only 4 cups. Again, just I can't even start talking about Pesach because certain people will get all agitated, right? I mean, obviously you don't start preparing till Pesach till Tu B'Shvat, but so we didn't even bench the Chodesh yet of Shvat. That's not till Shabbos, so we can't be talking about Pesach. I could just say I don't want to eat in a home that they already made the desserts for the 7th day of Pesach on Tu B'Shvat. I'm just saying. I think that it's good to be prepared. It's good to, but not that good. So, and there are people who. Okay, so let me just go back a second. Yeah, there are people who today drink 5 cups out of this Zionist expression.
I'm Zionism, I wanted to drink more alcohol.
Yeah. It could be the 5th cup of grape juice. I mean, that's. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, somebody wants to have more than 4 cups, they can do it anyway during the meal. They can drink more. But if you notice the Rambam's Haggadah, he says this is the Haggadah that we read during the exile. Again, not trying to get too Pesach oriented right now. This is the most that I prepare for Pesach is the Divrei Torah. So from the very beginning, Halach Ma'anya is a galut tefillah or opening, right? Hachi hashta, right next year in Yerushalayim, and so that is obviously could not have been said in galut. So therefore, there was a different text. Now, what that text was, so therefore some will claim that the text would include the fifth cup. So as I said, there was all kinds of interesting opinions over here, but nonetheless, it is, again, if you're going to claim there's only 4 Lashonot V'Gula, but why not Lakachti? By the way, the simple answer to that could be that Pesach is not about Veheveti. Pesach is not about Veheveti, because Veheveti, that may be Chag HaShavuot, that may be something else, that may be the Bikurim. That, again, there's 4 Lashonot of Geula, Heveti may not be one of them. So as I said, that's part of the background to all of this. But I do want to read one pasuk again, because as I was reading it, I'm certainly hopeful that it generated some type of a reference in your minds, and that was pasuk Zayin, because pasuk Zayin sounds, at least to me, very much like a marriage. V'lakachti etchem li, right? L'kicha ki yikach ish isha. The Gemara learns kicha stay Ephron. V'lakachti etchem li. It almost sounds to me like Vaera mikudeshet li. It sounds very much like a wedding. V'lakachti etchem li la'am. Which again, this talks about the 2 sides of the relationship. V'yadatem, yidiyah is also a really interesting word, because yidiyah, especially from a Bereshit perspective, is one of intimacy. So therefore, v'yadatem ki Hashem l'keichem otzi etchem mitachat sevlot Mitzrayim. Now, those of you who are just wondering, is this my reading into it? Is there a place to say that leaving Egypt really is a damsel in distress, and the knight in shining armor comes and takes us out, and we go running off into places unknown with him? That's a pasuk which hopefully you're familiar with in source number 12. V'yihid Vashem Yirmiyahu. V'yihid Vashem Elai Lemar Haloch v'karati boznei Yerushalayim Lemar Kol Amar Hashem Zacharti lach Chesed Ne'urayich Ahavat Kilulotayich. What is Kilulotayich? It is of a kala. It is of a bride and a bridegroom. Lech techa acharai b'midbar be'eretz lo zru'ah, where you followed me off into the desert of a place with nothing growing. So yes, the Navi absolutely 100% is reading back, leaving Egypt as a marriage. So therefore, and again, this focuses on this idea that we followed God off into the desert, places unknown. I don't know, there's a shidduch, the guys, what are you going to do for a living? No, just follow me off into the desert. So there requires, I guess every marriage really requires some type of a leap of faith, but that is what the credit over here. So I'm saying, if Yirmiyahu is going to articulate it in that particular way, so then it is nonetheless interesting that element is, again, you don't have to work hard. That element is here when you read these verses. So it's not just languages or expressions of redemption. There is something, again, the lack of any better word is intimacy. Now, there's a couple of things here that I still want to come back to, but the first thing I want to note is the response, and that's Pasuk Tet. Vayidaber Moshe Cain el Bnei Israel, and Moshe relays all of these wonderful, dramatic, important messages to the Jewish people. V'lo shamu el Moshe mikotze ruach u'me'avodah kasha. And they did not listen to Moshe because of shortness of spirit and because of avodah kasha. And that's debated what avodah kasha means, but the simple reading will be that they were so involved in their servitude that they were unable to really properly be able to internalize that which God had relayed to them, or Moshe relayed to them from God, and therefore it really has a sad ending to this particular section. It's interesting that we read the 4 languages, we actually read the promise, and we're not reading it in context, because in context it was like, yeah, thank you. It's like, no, we don't believe it. Now, I guess the larger question is, why don't we believe it? So that is our title for today, Feelings of Inadequacy. It could very well be that we don't feel that we're deserving of this. Which means if you take these enslaved masses and God says, no, we're going to be partners, you're kind of like looking both ways. Me? Like, what are you talking about? I mean, part of the problem of slavery is that you begin to identify with your job. You begin to identify your identity is that of what you do in your vocation, and therefore, on a daily basis, you are the people who are not just enslaved, but humiliated, doing the kind of work, having no personal autonomy, having no freedom, and that's aside from the physical and the emotional, spiritual damage which is taking place. It has to then also seep into feelings of, who you are. So I just want to keep that in mind, read a little bit further, and then I want to come back and maybe read the words again, because it could be that we were missing something. It continues then, here, it skipped a couple of verses. "V'diber Moshe lefnei Hashem, lemor, hein b'nei Yisrael lo shamu alai, ve'ech yishmeni paro, v'ani yisrael oral svatayim." So if identified an aspect of feelings of inadequacy, you now realize that that actually reaches to one other person, and that's Moshe. And Moshe says, Bnei Yisrael haven't listened to me. Paro's not going to listen to me. And not only that, I am aral svatayim, which I don't think is such an easy turn of phrase, which means, is kaved pen, kaved lashon the same thing as aral svatayim? I have my doubts about that. But Moshe is saying is that I am not the spokesperson, and it's not going to work, and people don't listen to me. That's really amazing. People don't listen to me. Now, if you just think about Moshe for a second, Moshe had an audition as Savior many years before. Right, he goes down, sees people fighting, he saves one, and next time the Jews are fighting, and he tries to again get involved. Guys, we can do better than this. We're better, and who are you? And Moshe kind of just gives up and walks away. And when I say he gives up, you should argue with me. So what do you mean he gives up? His life is threatened at that point. The larger point is, it didn't work. They didn't listen to him. They questioned him. So Moshe now, if I just say that there are somehow feelings of inadequacy, and by the way, for that matter, Moshe has at this point already approached Paro, and that's how we ended last week's parsha. He approaches Paro and he says, God sent me, let my people go, so on and so forth, and that did not work very well. Which means, to what extent did that not work well? This situation deteriorated. The situation gets worse and does not get better. So again, if you're Moshe and you have feelings of inadequacy at this particular point, perhaps it's feelings of reality. That this is what it is. In source number 10 was the previous conversation. Va'achar bo Moshe va'Aaron v'yomur el Paro kol amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael shalach et ami v'chugu liba midbar v'yom Paro mi Hashem asher shema b'kolo l'shalach et Yisrael lo yadati Hashem gam Yisrael lo shalach. It's just not going to work. Like rejected, shot down. So now again, God is saying, Moshe comes back, it's not working, and God is saying, no, go and tell Israel this, and this, and they say, no. So now Moshe is in an interesting situation. Moshe's situation, again, perhaps to some extent parallels Bnei Yisrael, and then we get a strange series of verses. And it's the kind of thing which is so strange that we don't even bother asking about it. It's strange that it's here. It's strange the way it's presented. It's strange what's not here. It's strange where it ends. So let me just start reading it. Pasuk Yudalid. Or we'll read Yud Gimel, the response. V'deber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron v'yitzavim b'nei Yisrael v'Paro melech Mitzrayim l'tziah b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. No, go back, double down. Right? And the language is good. V'yitzavim. Command them. They're not listening. Command them. Ve'el Paro. You're taking them out, which means God doubles down as well. Pasuk Yudalid. Eile Roshei Beit Avotam Bnei Ruvain B'chor Yisrael, and it gives a list of people in the family. Chanoch, Chafalu, Chatzron, V'Charmi, Eile Mishpachot Ruvain. Uvnei Shimon, Yimilov, Yamin, V'Ohad, V'Yachin, V'Tzochar, V'Shaul ben Aknanit, Eile Mishpachot Shimon. Ve'eile Shemot Bnei Levi L'Todotam, Gershon, Kahn, Mariu, Shnei Chayei, Levi, and now it gets into more details about Levi. B'nei Gershon gives a list. B'nei Kahat, Amron v'Yitzar, B'Chevron gives more over here. V'Yikach Amram et Yocheved dodato lo leisha, v'teidah lo ta'aron, v'et Moshe. And then it gives us more details. We can skip a little bit. V'Yikach Aaron et Elisheva. Oh, sorry, Kaf Aleph was good. I should have bolded that. V'nei Yitzar Korach, right, and some other people over here. Oh, right. We have Yikach Aaron et Elisheva bat Aaronav Achot Nachshon Elisha v'tel lo et Nadav et Avihu v'tel Elazar v'Tamar v'nei Korach gives us some of the names of them. V'Elazar ben Aaron lekach lo mibanot Putiel lo leisha and gives us some more information. Hu Aaron Moshe asher Amar Hashem lahem lo tzia b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzivotam him v'adrim el Paro melech Mitzrayim lo tzia b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim Hu Moshe v'Aaron Aaron Moshe Moshe Aaron v'hi b'yom deber Hashem al Moshe be'eretz Mitzrayim. Which is great because it just now gave us a list, some more detailed, some more basic, of 3 tribes, and then stops. So what is this doing here? And you're going to see that, look at Rashi. Eile Roshe b'nei Avram, Eile Roshe beit Avotam, mitoch shehuzkak liyaches shifto shel Levi ad Moshe ba'Aaron, because it had to tell us. By the way, why did it have to tell us? It already told us. Yilach ish mi beit Levi lekachet bat Levi. We already know who Moshe is. Okay, you want to be more specific? Could have given us more information then, but it gives us Moshe's larger family. So since it wants to tell us about Moshe, so then it gave us everything up till that point. I kind of suspect that there's a more efficient way of doing this. I mean, again, the Torah that sometimes is just so terribly stingy in information, and we can learn over by the slightest turn of phrase, and that other times is so generous with information, and even telling us, right, no, other stuff is not necessary. We just had to kind of catch up to this point. B'shvil Moshe v'Aaron, itzchil liachasam derech toldotam Reuven. In order to get up to where we're up to in the story, it goes back from the beginning and tells us about Reuven. U'v'psikta rabti ra'iti lefi shekintram Yaakov aviyim l'shlosh v'tzum alalu b'shat moto chazar katuv yichasam kedil kan levadam lomer shachashuvim heim. That it's saying that, now this is really interesting, it's saying that Yaakov expressed negativity towards these 3 tribes. Reuven, not nice things to say. Shimon, Levi, not nice things to say about them. And therefore, they accepted the Musar, they accepted what Yaakov had said, and here it wants to go back and say, oh yeah, by the way, these are good standing Jews. Again, really interesting. The Rashbam, Mefarish b'Mechilta, Elu Shlosha Shoftim Shegina Otam Yaakov Be'et Zavato. He goes to that as the first interpretation. Yichasamata Katuv Lo Dia Shachashuvim Heim. But then he says, Ulefi Pshat Ad Moshe v'Aaron Otzim Liaches Kahn v'Ad Korach v'Nei Yisrael Pinchas Aniskarim Lefanenu b'Torah L'dat Mihim Aniskarim Lefanenu. So that's really interesting also, because along the way there's some other people mentioned, and some of it's a little ominous. And we're going to need to know who Korach is. By the way, we're told who Korach is right from the beginning of Parshat Korach. So it's as if he's saying, there's some foreshadowing we're going to need to know later on in some of these people, Korach and Pinchas and so on. So I'm going to say again that, first of all, Rashi and the Rashbam are pretty similar. Secondly, you realize they have to work hard to give us an interpretation because it's so unclear what this is doing here. And it's the kind of thing that we would probably prefer that we didn't have the problem to explain rather than having to explain the problem. You could have had the last couple of verses, you could have started from Levi, you could have just introduced Aaron and then Moshe and say that this is the family that they're from. You didn't have to do everything else. The Ramban it couldn't have started by Levi, like I just now suggested, because then you would think that Levi was the firstborn, unless, of course, you remember Sefer Bereshit. So it goes on, it says, Va'od ki heim ba'atzmam chasidei elyon ru'uyim l'sefer behin ka'avot ha'olam. And again it talks, because he notes the distinction between the way that Levi is referred to versus the other 2. There's much more information there. He says, because they are so holy. Of course, they're holy. Why? Because Moshe and Aaron come from them. There are some others that come from there as well, like, now the question is who I should be mentioning. The midrash that Rashi quotes is in source number 5, and I'm not going to bother reading it. I'll just note that it's there. In source number 6 is the running commentary here of the Targum Yonatan. And he notes here a couple of things that we should pay attention to. One is when he speaks about avodah kasha, he describes that as avodah zarah. Okay, so I just want to pause there. And he's not the only place. There are midrashim as well, saying OUisrael doesn't accept God is going to take you out, not because they're so busy at work, right? That's what it sounds like. Oh, just too busy at work. No, it's that avodah kasha, it's saying something a little more sophisticated, and I want to explain the circle. We probably find something similar in Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya is, of course, the Tana that goes astray, and he is the one who ends up becoming a supporter of the Romans. And you have to ask yourself, why would he become a dissident like this? Why would he reject God, the God of Israel, become with the Romans? Well, the Romans are more powerful than the Jews. Why are they more powerful? By the way, this is a very pagan idea, and I'm going to come back to this as we continue, because paganism doesn't seem to ever really disappear. That the Romans are more powerful. If the Romans are more powerful, because the Romans destroyed the temple, so why should I put my faith in God with something which is more powerful? Which means reading the newspapers can lead one to theological conclusions. So over here, the Jews are enslaved by Egypt. So what does the slave believe? The slave believes that the power which is enslaving them is more powerful than their God, who has, and I say chas v'shalom, empty promises. This goes back exactly to what we're up to in the story. They don't believe, because how can you defeat the Egyptians? Their God is obviously more powerful than our God. So this is almost a constant in Jewish history. I'm not saying the Jews always fall for it, but this is a constant, that if Jews are suffering, so then it must be that God is not protecting us. For Christianity, this became theology. The more that we can make Jews suffer, the more we can prove that their God has rejected them, which becomes a wonderful circular reasoning, make them suffer more. So, you see, God didn't do a miracle and protect them, so it must be that God has rejected them. So if you go back at this moment, it's because of the avodah kasha, which is wrapped up with their perceptions of avodah zarah, because apparently God can't save them, and that's why they are enslaved. And Moshe's message to them is that God just now said that now is the time. Ani Hashem. Now is the time for the promises to come true. This is taking place right now. So I'm just saying is that there is some interesting theology which in that point. Now, when he starts going through these three tribes, there is a little bit more negativity than maybe we let on. So over here, okay, we have Ruvain, Bechor Yisrael. It mentions Shaul. Who is this Shaul? Who's Zimri? Shishil Nafshil is not. So that's also good foreshadowing for one of the problems that are going to take place a little bit later on. It mentions Pinchas afterwards, and it tells us that Pinchas is Eliyahu. This is one of the sources that says this. Amram, we're told, marries his aunt. Right? Over here, the Targum actually protects Amram, because instead of calling Dodato, he calls it Chavivato, his lover. He marries his lover, which is really interesting. Although Chavivato may also be the Aramaic for Dodato, because of a dual meaning. You have Korach, Nadav Avihu, Elazar, it says, Ben Aaron, he married one of the Benot Shel Yitro, but it did not say that in the text, and Fatela Lo Pinchas, and had a child on Pinchas. Now, I just want to stop for a second. How many laws from Sefer Vayikra were just now broken here along the way? And again, remember, maybe I wasn't clear enough, but by saying Shaul ben Akna'anit, that means that somebody married a Knaanit, which is also not so nice. So if you look at source number 17, which is, of course, it's Vayikra, Perek Yudchet, Daber b'nei Yisrael marked lehem ani Hashem lekechem k'maseh eretz Mitzrayim asher yishavtem ba lo tasu k'maseh eretz Canaan asher ani mevi etchem shama lo tasu u'v'chukoteim lo tilechu. Don't follow the practices of Egypt or the practices of Canaan. Ervat eshet avicha lo tigaleh. Oh, by the way, we just now went back to Reuven. That's what Reuven did. Ervat achot avicha lo tigaleh. Okay, that may have taken us to Amram. Okay, that's not so good. Right? El ishto lo tikorev dodotcha hi. Right? Ervat chalatcha lo tigaleh. Okay, we didn't get up to Yehuda, but we could have thrown him into this as well. Chalatcha. And the interesting thing about all of this is it says, Pasuk Kaf Daled, Al titma'u b'chol eila, ki b'chol eila nitma'u agayim asher ni mashalayich mepneichem, v'titamei ha'aretz v'vkod avona aleh, v'taki ha'aretz et yoshveh. That all of these behaviors is what causes the land to expel the current inhabitants. And if you're going to go there, ushmartem atem et chukotai v'et mishpatai v'lo tasu mikol tvorot ha'ela hezrach v'gera gar b'tochachem. Pasuk Kaf Zayin, ki et kol tvorot ha'el asu anshei ha'aretz asher lefnechem v'nitma'a ha'aretz. V'lo ta'ki ha'aretz etchem v'timatchem ota kasher ka'a goy asher lefnechem. So I'm just going to point out now that this list of people is a little bit more interesting than maybe it was, prior to comparing it to Vayikra. And I want to go back now one more time. I told you, I wanted to read this whole section again because it says something interesting, but let me just pause for a moment. If somehow these various tribes, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, I can continue, Yehuda, and so on, have some kind of a sense of the morality of Vayikra, then how would they feel about themselves and their chances of entering into the land and being able to be the ones who are going to take this land? By the way, for that matter, how confident can they be that they're going to be the ones who are going to be taken out? Which means, I go back to the larger point I made when I started, there may very well be feelings of inadequacy. We are not deserving to be saved. Which means, I just now mentioned two sides, which may be independent, but they may be interrelated. One side is that theologically, it's hard for them to believe in a God who they haven't seen in a while, or ever. They heard their Bible stories. But Egypt is very strong. When you are stuck in Egypt, you begin to believe the things that it says in the Egyptian newspapers. And they believe the Egyptian gods are powerful because look how powerful Egypt is. By the way, somebody should have told them, you know who built up Egypt? You know who gave them all of their money? You know who created the financial situation? It was a Jew. It was Yosef who did it. And Yosef did it interpreting dreams with God's interpretation. Which, by the way, we're going to get really close now. You know what? At which point Yosef realized that all this was going to take place? When he heard the dream of the wine steward, he knew that was his path out. He tried to speed up the geula and said, okay, just go tell him and get me out really quickly. But had to wait a little bit until Paro's going to have his dreams, and then the wine stewards are going to come and tell him to get out. But the wine steward is the chalta to geula. It says kos 4 times in that narrative, and that is the beginning of the geula, which means if you're going to believe, that this is possible. And by the way, then the transformation of Yosef going from slave, servant, to becoming all, powerful and so on, and not only that builds up Egypt. What I'm just saying is that Yosef is always in the background over here, unless you forget him. And they have all forgotten, and just there's this powerful Egypt, and therefore the Egyptian gods are ones we can't contend with. But for that matter, we are slaves, and we don't have a God who can protect us. And we are inadequate even if there were a God, because why would God want to deal with us at all? And I want to now go back and read what we read before. Because what did God say to them? He doesn't say a word about their deserving anything. What he says over here is, I appeared to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, back in source 1, Pasuk Gimel, Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. Again, they did not see the future where everything comes to fruition. V'gam hakimoti et briti itam. I'm keeping my covenant with them. Which means this may not be about you. By the way, this is itself amazing, because we're talking to the Jews about being saved. And and for us, Yetziat Mitzrayim, we go back and we think, no, Yetziat Mitzrayim is not about Yetziat Mitzrayim. And you're going to say, that's ridiculous. Yetziat Mitzrayim is not about Yetziat Mitzrayim. Yetziat Mitzrayim is about God keeping the covenant that he made with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. God said to Avram, your children will be, your descendants will be enslaved in a land which isn't theirs, and then I'm going to take them out. That is a promise to Avraham. This is not about them. It's about Avram. And what else did God say to Avram? And your descendants will then get out and they will receive this land. Receiving the land is not about them. It is about Avraham. Right? Just keep on reading. Leteit lahem et eretz Canaan. Leteit lahem et eretz Canaan. Who is the land being given to? Them. What is our connection to it? Vanigam Shamati, right, all about the servitude, Ve'eskoret Briti. But what's the Brit? The Brit is with the Avot. Tell Am Yisrael, Votzeti Etchem, and that's all the great language, Etzetim, V'etzalti, V'ka'alti, V'lakachti Etchem li, right, all of this, V'yitim li, right, but all of this is for another reason. Reveti Etchem el ha'aretz, which land? Asher nasati etidi latet ota le Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. V'natati ota lachem Marashani Hashem. You're getting it only because you're the beneficiaries of a will, and the will, the inheritance, is something which belongs to the Avot, and you're the ones around right now in order to take it, but this is not about you. This is about them. So therefore, my feelings of inadequacy, my feelings of being insecure, it's not about me. But did I have a great-great-great-great-grandfather who was unbelievable, and he was Avram Avinu? Which means this is the whole question. Do you identify as a descendant of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah? If you do, then you should know that you were deserving of all kinds of greatness. Now, what's the problem with the Shidduch? So the Shidduch is taking place because of Yichus. Okay? It's taking place because of Yichus. I'm marrying you. Well, that's not really the case. It's not. The case is that you are Am Yisrael, and I'm already married to Am Yisrael. I'm married to Am Yisrael because of the relationship that I have with Avram. You just happen to be the ones around right now who are manifest in this identity of who Am Yisrael is. So therefore, we are getting married, and we're going off into the desert, and then we're going to go off into the land of Israel because you're my bride. And they're saying, like, what are you talking about? Well, that's part of the inheritance which is taking place. When we read a little bit further, okay, a lot further, and we go to source 11. It's Devarim, Perik Tet. Shema Yisrael, Ata over Hayom et Yarden, Levo l'resh goyim dolim v'atzmim me'eka. Right, you're going into the land. Al tomar bilovcha b'hadof Hashem lechachotom lefanecha leimor b'tzidkati hevi'ani Hashem l'reshet eretz hazot. Don't say I am deserving. U'v'rishat hagoyim ha'ela Hashem l'reshem lefanecha. God is chasing them because they're wicked. Lo b'tzidkatcha u'v'yosher levavcha atava l'reshet et artzam. It's not because you are so good. Ki b'rishat hagoyim, they are so bad. Hashem Morisham mipanecha. You notice the word Morisham? It's the inheritance. You are inheriting the land. Ulaman hakim et davar asher nishba Hashem la'avotecha la'avram liyitzchak u'liyaakov. Which means Dvarim Tet, talking about us entering the land, is telling us the exact same thing which was told over here in these Arba Lashonot HaGeulah. But the mistake about the Arba Lashonot HaGeulah is to think that it's present tense directed towards Am Yisrael right then, because it's not. It's directed toward them, but only by virtue of them being the people around who God can keep his promise to, or who God can keep the promise that he had made in the past to Avi, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And God is saying, now's the time for me to keep this promise. Entering into the land is because of this promise. V'yadata ki lo b'tzidkatcha, and it goes on and on. Ki am kishei oraf. You're undeserving. Am kishei oraf, I'm pretty convinced, is a phrase which is created with the golden calf, and I think it's used almost exclusively with the golden calf. Again, you guys mess up. You guys, you do avodah zarah, avodah kasha. You do avodah zarah. But don't think that just because you mess up that I'm going to get rid of you, because essentially God is saying I have a hard time doing that. We have a contractual relationship. And by the way, as it continues over here, it doubles down on that, and it says, Pasuk Tet Zayin, Vaera, right? We started this week's parsha, Vaera, Vaera, V'nei chatatem la'Hashem Elokeichem, asitem lachem egel masecha. At Har Sinai, you guys messed up. Sartim ahar min haderech. And then I had to take the luchot, and I broke the luchot, and so on. Uva Aharon hitanaf Hashem od lashmido. This is also even more interesting, because the whole purpose over there, remember, was to get up to Moshe and Aaron and talk about the greatness of Moshe and Aaron. And my point is that Moshe may feel inadequate. Aaron also eventually may get feelings of inadequacy. Did you notice along the line also we got to Pinchas, and who did it describe Pinchas as? Elazar, it says married a daughter of Yitro. By the way, theoretically, if I were going to be really difficult, I would say then Pinchas couldn't be a Kohen because his mother was a convert. And you're saying, leave me alone because it's before Matan Torah, but that Targum Yonatan just gave us another thing to think about. And by the way, another point in terms of inadequacy. Think about it, mentions Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu didn't work out well. And yes, I can make a whole case and argue why Nadav and Avihu were so holy. I can also argue why Nadav and Avihu actually may have sinned. Which means I start going through this list. It's to say that, oh, look how special Levi are. Okay. Amram seems to have messed up a little bit. Levi seems to have messed up a little bit, right? Elazar may have messed up a little bit. Nadav and Avihu may have messed up a little bit. By the time you get to Nadav and Avihu and Elazar, you're getting, pretty wide in terms of the Aaron may have messed up a little bit. So over here, by asking, but maybe we are inadequate. Maybe we're not deserving. And whoever says that, no, you missed the point over here. And I want to go back to what I think the larger point is, because Paro already made the connection for us. And this is going to now be really what the issue is. And it was what I read before when Moshe and Aaron come, and what does he say? Source number 10 right before this, Pasuk Bet, Vayom Paro, Mi Hashem, Asher Shma B'Kolo, L'Shalech Yisrael, Lo Yadati Et Hashem, V'Gam Et Yisrael, Lo Shalech. Am Yisrael and God are intertwined. In whose mind? In Paro's mind. By the way, it's not just Paro's mind. This now becomes the issue. God is saying, whether you like it or not, there's a whole other side of this. I need to keep my word. Why do I need to keep my word? Because I have a relation with David, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But once I have a relation with them, I have a relation with Am Yisrael. And therefore, if Am Yisrael is mistreated, do you know what ends up happening? It ends up that God gets mistreated as well. Which means there is this absolute relationship between God and the Jewish people, and therefore Paro could reject any rights of the Jewish people. They're just slaves because he rejects God. If he accepts God, then he needs to accept the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, what is God, the language being used over here, which I said, is the language which emerges in other places in Navi, and certainly within Chazal, it's a language of marriage. I've taken you as my people. Now, of course, what happens when you get to a golden calf? You could say, okay, that's it. Okay, they cheated. The relationship is over. Which actually takes us to, I said before that within certain theology, Christian theology, the more that the Jews suffer, the more that it's proof that the Jews have been rejected. I just want you to consider the following. Do we all know what what's the exact word? Now it's not. Now it escapes me. It is the theology where the church says superseded. It's where or replacement theology. It's that the church has replaced Israel. So I just want to make a couple things about that. Within Christian theology, they accept the same point. They have other verses in the New Testament as well, but they accept the same point that God is the groom and God is married to the church. Within Catholic theology, they also believe that a Catholic wedding is one which is permanent. So how in the world do you get to a place that the Jews have been rejected when you believe that a Catholic marriage is forever? So when the Jews are married to God and they believe in a replacement theology whereby the Jews are replaced by the church, how does that happen? And I'll just tell you right now, I should start a new career as a posek for Catholics and saying, It's not that you're divorcing and marrying somebody else. She just replaced the first one. Right? Isn't that exactly the path? I mean, they'll say that the church is Israel. You know, you talk about identity fraud. This is the greatest identity fraud, which has happened in human history. But they're going to claim that you can't divorce. This is not just like Rabbeinu Gershon, right? They say this is I believe it's a 20th century interpretation. They say Rabbeinu Gershon is called Rabbeinu Gershon Me'or Hagola, the light of the exile. Why Me'or Hagola? So he made a number of what's called takanot of Rabbeinu Gershon. One of them is you can't take a second wife. One of them is you can't divorce your wife without her agreement. So he says, how does he protect the Jews in the exile? Because God can't get rid of the Jewish people without their agreeing, and he can't take somebody else as well, which means if Beit Din Shomata says this, then Beit Din Shomala has to accept it as well, and therefore, throughout all these years, when the Jews are quote-unquote rejected, or at least that's the narrative of the church, then you can't say that God will get rid of the Jews and take somebody else. So it's not just that this should not work within Catholic theology, is that Rabbeinu Gershon also created a takana against it. But I'm going to say there is a larger issue. The larger issue is that Jewish suffering is a chilul Hashem. I'm saying that's exactly the point. And what God is saying here is, I need to take you out of Egypt. It's because there is this intertwining between the two of us. You're not following this. All that you're saying is, but I'm inadequate. Yeah, that's exactly the point, that you're inadequate. That's the issue. That's why I have to take you out. Because you feel inadequate, and maybe you are inadequate. But it's not about you. It's about something which is much larger. And if you keep this in mind, a couple of things are going to fall into line. One of them has to be with the whole nature of the Second Commonwealth, which means building the Bayit Sheni. So there's a couple of things that I want to bring together on this. First of all, only rabbis can do this. They'll start with the Mishnah, and then we'll go back to the Psukim. The Mishnah, when it describes in source 14 those who went on Aliyah and came up in Bayit Sheni, it says Asara Yuchasim Alumi Bavel. There were people of 10 different strata, as it were, of Yichus, right? We talked about Yichus, that came up. It's Kohanim, Leviah, Yisraelai, Chalalei, Geri, V'chori, Mamzeri, Netini, Shtuki, Vasufi. And they get worse and worse, by the way, along the way on the list. All kinds of people came up. And the Gemara, which is in source 15, and Rashi explains it in 16, when all of this happened, Bavel became much more perfected, because all of the hard cases ended up coming up to Israel, where it's like let the Beis Din in Israel deal with all of these things, but we can't deal with it. So Chutz La'aretz becomes this more perfected place, becomes like flour which is being sifted. That's the terminology used in the Gemara. I need to see the terminology over here. It's there. It's the middle of 15. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel Kol Artzot Isa L'Eretzel Isa L'Bavel. Again, it's describing this sifting which is taking place. But now you can say to yourself, so the inadequate people go in, but the land can't tolerate the inadequate people. So there is just this strangeness. In source 13, which is maybe we could have gone and talked about that, Yeshua Yalavush Bigadim Su'im. And if you know this from either the commentaries, or there's other places in Navi as well, is that it was the various people who were married to inappropriate people. We'll just leave it at that. It's the various intermarriage and so on which is taking place, which means this theme of inadequacy, it's not a one-time theme. It's something which seems to repeat itself over history. The much stronger language, which I think needs to be read together, is source 17. This is Yecheskel, Perek Lamed Vav, and I was actually a little surprised, because after thinking about it, and then looking it up, and then reading it, I'm kind of shocked that I couldn't easily find, maybe there's somebody there, I didn't find, but I certainly didn't easily find anybody who read this together with our parsha and the 4 lashonot of Geula, at least 4 lashonot. L'chein amar lebeit Yisrael, kol mar Hashem Elokim, lo lama'anchem ani yoseh beit Yisrael. One second, you like this? It's very clear. It's not about you. Ki im l'shem kodshi asher chilaltem begoyim asher batem sham. It's because the situation of Jews being in exile is a chilul Hashem. V'kidashti et shmi agadol hamichulal b'goyim. I'm going to sanctify my name, which is being desecrated right now. Asher chilaltem b'tocham. V'yadu hagoyim ki ani Hashem ne'um Hashem Elokim v'kdashi b'chem leinehem. When I sanctify you, again, there's language of marriage here, literally of kedushin. V'lakachti etchem. One second, does this sound a little familiar? V'lakachti etchem min hagoyim v'kibatzti etchem mikol ha'artzot v'eveti etchem el admatchem. So I'm just like reading all this and saying, how in the world is nobody reading this together? It just sounds like the same thing. And it continues. But what's the problem? What about all the people coming up, or people who are inadequate, and people who have dirty clothing, and people who have dirty souls, and people who've made mistakes, and people who've done all kinds of reasons that their feelings of inadequacy are justified? V'zarakti aleichem mayim taharim utehartem. But I'm going to throw upon you pure water and purify you. Mikol tumatchem. Umikol gulachechem, ateratchem, from all of the things and all, of this inappropriateness, I'm going to purify you. V'natati lechem leiv chadash, ruach chadasha tin b'kir b'chem. V'chasirasi et leiv ha'evn mibzarchem, right? Some people have hearts of stone. V'natati lechem leiv basar. I'm going to give you a new heart. ורוחי אתן בקרבכם, ועשיתי את אשר בחוקי תלכו משפטי תשמעו ועשיתם, וישבתם בארץ אשר נתתי לפניכם, והייתם לי לעם, ואנוכי אליכם לאלוקים. Again, doesn't sound that, again, like this language of marriage, and you will be for me a people, and I will be for you a God. And that's what I'm saying. I'm just kind of shocked. I was not, again, I'm being careful, easily find the connection over here. But again, I'm going to clarify in a moment, just read a little bit more. Voshati etchem mikol tumatchem, v'karati et dagan v'beiti otam v'loten lechem l'rav, v'beiti et pri eretz. I'm just going to skip towards the end. V'zachartem et derchem ha'ra'im v'malachem, and so on. Lo lema'anchem ani yoseh ne'um Hashem Elokim yivada lachem. Right? This is not for you. So I just want to pause for a moment and talk about this. One, you've already heard me say multiple times, I'm completely convinced that this is an extension of what Moshe is told to tell the people then. If you feel inadequate, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's that the situation of Jews being in Chutz La'aretz, and by the way, don't go telling them this, just tell them to keep supporting your various organizations. And I know, I love the argument that we need a strong diaspora, that they're willing to volunteer and be a strong diaspora in order to support Israel. Unless, of course, the times that they then need also, because good friends need to tell friends when they're making mistakes and tell us how we should be doing things, and so on and so forth. Obviously, I don't want to get political. We'll leave this to others to do. But just like one question, have you read Yecheskel Lamed Vav, which says the situation of Jews being in the diaspora is a chilul Hashem, because God and the Jewish people are interwoven? And we heard one part of it, I hope very clearly, when we read the part which said that, but I made a promise. The promise is to Avi, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And now, again, what's the conclusion? It's not about you. And I made a promise to them, I'm going to give them the land. And this is not about you. You could get kicked out of the land, because the land can only tolerate certain things. But don't think you deserve to be there, because you don't. But I made a promise to them. And your rights there are because you are the descendants of them. But realize that you being in Chutz La'aretz, even though when the Jews go into exile, the Shekhinah goes with them, but it's a situation of Chilul Hashem. Because God promised the land to us. And we're not in the land, it's a Chilul Hashem. And therefore, people who make this choice, I'd like to have a little bit of a Chilul Hashem, and I this is my life, and it's very difficult to do something else. I don't have to say all of this to you, at least those of you sitting in the room right now, but this is what it says in Yechezkel. But the point about Yechezkel, when it gets articulated, is God, again, the Navi is speaking from God's side. Again, not just that I have a promise and I have to keep my word. There's another part of this, and that is that we are interconnected. And when, I'm going to read it again, when Paro can say, never heard of God and the Jews could be slaves, well, that's exactly the problem. And the Jews being slaves is evidence, as it were, of God not being all-powerful. And God says, I'm only going to let that situation last for a limited amount of time until I am forced to show my strength and do all kinds of miracles in order to show that there is a God who is all-powerful, because for better or worse, for us it's much better, the Jewish people are identified with God, and that's part of being God's people. I want to end up with one story that I didn't send to you. If any of you want it, I'll send you the 5th page, right? We have a 5th cup. So I also have a 5th page over here. I found it in a book which is called Chaye Hareya, about Rav Kook, the life of Rav Kook, of Rav Yitzchak Cohen Kook, and it tells of a story. Now the story that it tells, I happened to come across this because I'm writing about this other person. And this other person was a farmer who lived in Rehovot, and he had learned in the same yeshiva as Rav Kook. He learned in Volozhin. There's a lot more things for me to say about him. As I said, I'm writing at least a monograph, maybe a small book, maybe a book about him and some of the things that he's done. I don't want to ruin that whole story right now, but I will say this: he became a farmer, and but he was quote unquote ultra orthodox. I say, but he was ultra orthodox, and at some point, Rav Kook comes to Rehovot, and and he meets him, and he has regret. This other fellow has regret. He goes, like all these people in Rehovot, which is at this point the most shav really. He goes, the new generation is not observant. The new generation isn't keeping Shabbat. The new generation is not educated in Torah. And is this? And he says, I think it would have been better if we just stayed back in Europe, where everybody was religious. So again, to hear a story like this being told in the 1910s, 1920, I think this fellow died by 1924, Rav Kook died by 1935, and before a Holocaust, before the reality of staying in Europe was not really a reality, and the only ones who really survived were the ones who came. And by the way, you just look at the families, family after family after family, and where they came from, and that becomes revealed at some point. And Rav Kook responds to him, and what I'm about to say is very famous, and I would not be surprised if he said it on more than one occasion to more than one person. But what was interesting to me is that that's this conversation which takes place, and he says, when they were building the Beit HaMikdash, there were workers that were there, and workers spit, and workers scratch, and workers curse, and workers are workers. He goes, but when they finished building, then the thing they built ended up being very holy. And he says, but that's what's taking place now as well. A whole bunch of workers came into this land to build up the land. And as they're building the land, okay, you see certain things, but essentially what he's saying is, don't assume, just because somebody looks inadequate, that they are in fact inadequate, because inadequate people doing holy things are by extension holy. And inadequate people who are descendants of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov have a great amount of rights of inheritance in terms of this place. So essentially, don't judge the movie by seeing one scene, because there's lots of more scenes which are going to be presented along the way. But this metaphor of building even the holiest place, the Beit HaMikdash, and the workers that are building it may not seem the same thing as the Kohen Gadol, who one day is going to walk inside and do the holiest things there. But still, the workers have to build it, and you're just living together with all the workers right now. And what Rav Kook is really saying, and that's really a great privilege, because all of these workers at some point were going to come to this realization that they really did something which was, in fact, quite holy. But that's what's taking place now as well, is that the Jewish people, again, they're involved in Avodah Kasha. They feel inadequate. How can they possibly be the beneficiaries of all of these promises? Who am I? Who am I to marry someone like this? Okay, maybe I have some yichus, but who am I to marry someone like this? He goes, you don't understand. God needs you Is that the most bizarre thing? God needs you. Why does God need you? Because he made a promise that he has to keep. And you're the ones that he can keep the promise with. If you're the ones that he can keep the promise with, that means that you are stuck together with God for eternity, because God has to keep a promise to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So therefore, God needs us as a people. God has to keep the promise to us. We may feel inadequate, but realize that we're really not. We have to deserve it. We don't deserve it. Again, there are all the rules that we saw. We're not entering the land because we deserve to be here. But we deserve to be here because, I know I'm contradicting myself, but we deserve to be here because we're OUisrael, and OUisrael, there's a relationship, and God's going to keep his word. Don't think that you're going to create a situation that God doesn't keep his word. God will keep his word. And therefore, it's like you kind of can read the four Lashon of Geula, and we're so focused on our Arba Kosot, and we're so focused on our leaving Mitzrayim, that we kind of miss the story. We miss the narrative. The story over here is that there's a relationship with the Avot. I'm keeping my word. And it said it twice there. It said it regarding taking you out. I gave my word to them. Regarding entering the land of Israel, I gave my word to them. You're the ones who are around. You're the ones to do it. So maybe the clothes are dirty, and maybe the relationships are wrong, and maybe you can read that whole section and look at every single reason why we are inadequate. And that's really what that whole list there is, especially when you read the Targum Yonatan. It's all of this inadequacy. Correct. Now it's time to build something which is holy. And when it ends up becoming holy, then you realize that you are actually worthy to inherit that which was promised to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.